Hello, everybody, Wolverine fans. We got another episode of Michigan Wolverines Live, and check it out. We got our new design. We're back and better than ever.
I even color coordinated, John. Look at this.
Look at you. Look at you. Real quick, we're going to introduce Mark, of course, but quick reminder to like, subscribe, share with a friend, and all of that good stuff. It helps the channel. It helps Mark with all of the content that he puts out there every single day. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing great today. The show looks great. Thank you so much for everything that you've contributed. John has kind of shaped us up here in recent weeks. So that's good to see as we continue on with our next edition of Wolverines Live, number 78. And Dre couldn't make it today, but we hope that his family situation's doing well. Everybody's healthy. Everybody's fine, but just couldn't make it today. But John and I are holding it down with a lot of good topics.
We got this, and there's me. In case you feel like checking me out on Twitter, John Diadamo. We are going to have a special guest later, Isaiah Hole. A lot of you know him. He's been on the show before, and I watch him all the time on the Locked On Wolverines podcast, and can't wait to have him on later. So real quick, housekeeping before we get started with our breaking news topic, right? Is that this is a quick reminder. Today we're starting a new thing. So if you want your comment or question posted and discussed, you're going to need to send a super chat. Now doesn't need to be a lot. You can find it in your couch cushions and all that. But, we're going to be having a lot of topics, and Isaiah is going to be here. So the best way to get that rolling is definitely a super chat. So that definitely supports the show as well. But we're going to start with this topic. And I think this is the hallmark of a program that's on the rise towards becoming elite. When your programs like Alabama, like Georgia, you're getting your coordinators poached on a semi-regular basis. And now we're seeing it again with our defensive coordinator, Jesse Minter, who is interviewing with the Eagles for the open DC job. Do you think that's, Mark, do you think that's kind of like an indicator of where the program is going now? Just the fact that this is happening more?
I saw the exchange between you and Dre, and of course, Dre's not wanting to see Jesse Minter leave. Not that you do, but that was your initial response, and I'm right there with you. That you want to hold on to your best, and there are going to be at times the Brent Venables of the world, but they are going to be the rare exception that they are going to stick around a program just because either A, they are extremely picky about the next opportunity, or number two, hey, they're a rare breed where it's like, hey, I'm good being a coordinator coaching football and not being a CEO. But most likely that coordinator, even at a Michigan, is going to have an opportunity because there is a thing called the NFL, and that's a next level opportunity. And, this is what we're staring down right now with Jess Minter and the Philadelphia Eagles. And, oh, yeah, they just played in the Super Bowl. So that's not just an NFL job, but it's a prime one where he is going to be working with a ton of top level talent there at Philly.
Yeah, and he's up against some stiff competition. Of course, he did have his time at the Ravens, so he does have that. But I think just from what I'm gathering, he's not the top candidate based on everything I've read on the subject. Now, you guys may be wondering, if you're following this, where's Jim Leonhard? Well, about 2 hours ago, they announced that Jim Leonhard and the Eagles had decided to have a couple of conversations, feel each other out, but he's decided to take the year off. So he's officially out of the sweepstakes. But Jesse Minter is definitely one of the candidates, so it's something to watch. But I think Michigan fans, tentatively, knock on wood, can potentially rest easy, because either he stays, or we just got back somebody called Chris Partridge, and he's pretty good. Okay, and you have Steve Klingscale. They can both be co-DCs, because Partridge was co-DC at Ole Miss, and he got that experience doing that.
And so you're pretty confident that they would go before in that direction of the co-defensive coordinators with those two?
I do. I do, and maybe I think Klingscale has the familiarity with the Raven style system that they run now, whereas Partridge does have that kind of co-DC experience and defensive experience. So I think at least for 1 year, I could see it being a co-DC situation. What do you think? You sound like you might want to go with one or the
No,
other, as just go all in.
no, I would think that Klingscale would be more prepared to be the guy if they were going to go with one guy. But yeah, that hasn't been something that Jim Harbaugh has shied away from in terms of having two guys share the role. And we don't know, but it would be interesting to know how much he determines what their roles are as equals versus what he allows them to determine how they're going to work together, because that could be a great situation or it could be a difficult situation when you have two guys in charge of trying to figure that out, because only one is going to be actively making that play call at the time. And so, yeah, that just has to be worked out, but it's worked well for Michigan.
Yeah, and you do, and Clinkscale was used as kind of like the passing game D coordinator last year, and I could see him continuing on in that capacity. Maybe Partridge focuses a little bit more on the rushing offense of the other team. So could go that way just based on what jobs they already have now. So real quick, so we've got I always fly this flag. Okay, we've got here at the Voice of College Football, we have a group called the Knuckleheads at the Voice of College Football, and it's a term that we've kind of coined each other based on some it goes back, but it's fun, and so what we ask everybody to do, it's $5 a month, and what you do is you go to patreon.com/MarkRogersTV and join the Patreon. You get a link from Mark, right? And then you become part of our 24/7 Discord chat to talk college football all the time, including there's a lot of Wolverines in there. So if you want to be among some company, we got a decent Wolverine group in the Discord.
Oh, I never know what I'm going to find when I jump in the Discord and see what you guys are digging up. There's no doubt about that. I usually just look. I don't often partake in the conversations. I just give it a glance, see what you guys
There
are
you
up
go.
to, and it's a good time.
Then it's like out, like okay. No, but it's great, and we've done so much cool stuff as a result of it. We started College Football After Dark. We just did a hangout. So after your Nebraska show finished, we all got on, and then we hung out for a while and headed over and did some Jeopardy with Tide Guy. So
Nice.
so it was a nice night full of stuff. So that's the kind of thing that you can enjoy if you spend $5 to be part of Mark's Patreon. So we're going into a topic. So if you had watched this show last week, we predicted that this was going to happen. Not that it was any crazy like Nostradamus prediction. However, we did say, based on multiple sources that we read and heard about on various platforms, that it was looking like Sherrone Moore was going to be named the sole offensive coordinator. He's earned it. 2 Joe Moore awards, excellent O-line every year. And so now he's going to be running as sole OC with the help of Kirk Campbell, who's going to be kind of de facto pass game coordinator, and Mike Hart, who's going to be contributing in the run game. So I'm curious, without I bring up Joel Klatt. He's one of my favorites, not named Mark Rogers, and Isaiah Hole, and he talks about the whole unified offensive coordinator versus having dual offensive coordinators, and just having one unified vision. And he was kind of hammering that throughout the season. Do you think, Mark, that just having that voice, and he's been around with the program, like that might help maybe just make things a bit smoother in terms of overall rhythm of play calling?
So I can't take too many shots at Michigan's offensive performance from last year when you really look at it. I know that the Illinois performance was a little uneven. Of course, Blake Corum left the game. J.J. McCarthy missed some downfield throws, but there were very few difficult offensive games for this team. So again, Jim Harbaugh seems to be pretty comfortable with the idea of putting two guys in play and giving them roles and watching them navigate that. And then also, as we talked about before, Jim Harbaugh, to whatever degree, defining their roles and their working relationship and making that happen. But it only makes sense that if one guy's in charge, then you don't run into that potential issue that you've got one vision, one direction, and you don't have that possibility of miscommunications or differences. And I also think Jim Harbaugh, being the person that has molded this, not just the program, but specifically this offense, and it's in his likeness, you almost have another offensive coordinator there in him. I'm sure he has tons of input into
True.
this offense.
And I like what Steve, your buddy Steve Deace, says about this, where when he was on the brink of being fired, he kind of said, "Okay, we're gonna ditch speed and space. We're gonna go to the 2009 Stanford playbook, and we're gonna run that. And if I'm gonna go down, I'm gonna do what I know." And so you can't argue with the results that it created. I mean, it's the last 2 years. I think at least part of it's because of that.
And Sherrone Moore's in a tremendous situation from a personnel standpoint. I don't know if we went year to year and kept going backwards, at what point we would find a Michigan offense that has the potential to be as productive and explosive and still efficient as this one, with a returning quarterback who I know took a little criticism here and there because it finished off with 2 pick sixes, but stripped those away. He also put up all those points in that game, brought them back to a one possession situation, played a great season, like a 22-5 touchdown to pick ratio. I think anyone would have taken that to start the season, when we were all, many of us, making that judgment that, Cade McNamara is the safer selection. JJ is going to make more mistakes, but he's going to blow the top off the defense, provide you so much in the run game, all those dynamic things, but he's probably going to be a little more risky with the football. Was he really? And throwing only 5 interceptions for the entire season. And then with Ronnie Bell, obviously a big loss as the leading receiver and a leader, and Olu Watimi, who is just the best at what he does.
Crushed it.
Yeah, he was just a tremendous transfer addition, as arguably the best center in the country. Sure, those are big losses, but when you compare those losses to what the typical contending team in a big conference has to face, those are pretty minimal losses. Like, they are loaded and ready to go. And I know Ryan Hayes, a big loss along the offensive line as well, but they're loaded on that side of the ball. So he's in a good place.
Absolutely. I will say, there was definitely a couple of times throughout the season, including in that TCU game, where I think the coordinators might have wanted to show their Tuesday and Wednesday homework on Saturday, or in the playoff game, and so that the Philly Ann Arbor special comes to mind, among others. So maybe with Sherrone Moore, because I believe Matt Weiss was the one in charge of red zone play calling and short yardage play calling. So with Sherrone Moore taking that over, maybe we can kind of go with the consistency and kind of just own what the program is, instead of trying something that Michigan just isn't.
For everybody who's awaiting Isaiah Hull from WolverinesWire to join us, we've had several back and forths. He's having camera issues. I've let him know, hey, just so we can hear you, You're good to go.
Yeah.
Go ahead and join us.
Come on in. Yeah, we don't care. We know what you look like. We see you. You see you all the time. All good. The last thing I'll say on this is, and then maybe we can get Isaiah's take on it too. Is that there's been a lot of talks about Jadyn Davis, and there was an interview recently. He was talking about NIL isn't so important to him. Just for those of you who don't know, Jadyn Davis, he's our kind of main QB prospect for the 2024 class, number 2 quarterback in the 2024 class. And he said that he was worried a little bit about the offense, like the deep ball, throwing the ball. Any quarterback at that level, he's going to want to throw the ball to his wide receivers, and Michigan has a tendency to not do that so much. So can that, that's kind of a curiosity there. And I think we have our special guest, and I'll leave it there hanging for a second. And we're going to bring on Isaiah Hull, who we're very happy to have on the show. Hey, Isaiah, how you doing?
Well, frustrated because for whatever reason, I cannot get, I tried 2 different cameras and I could not get either of them to work. For some reason, it's just like, no, we're not doing that. So you don't get to see me. You get to hear me at least.
Well, that's totally awesome. I was saying, like, listen, most of us are big fans. We watch you all the time anyway, so we know what you look like. So all good. And glad that you're here. We were just in the middle of talking. By the way, check out WolverinesWire, check out Locked On Wolverines podcast, and Twitter at Isaiah Hull. So just we were talking about kind of what the Michigan offense is going to look like under Sherrone Moore, and then how that could impact the offense as well as Jadyn Davis recruitment, and just kind of thinking through what the offense is going to look like in 2023.
Well, I can't imagine it's going to look really much different, except for I think the question is how much does the red zone stuff change? Because reportedly Matt Weiss that was his kind of play calling responsibility. So does that mean that that it's going to look a little bit more like what we saw between the 20s, or more so in the green zone rather? And also, does Sherrone decide to push the buttons a little bit more? He has one less person to essentially answer to. I still assume that Jim Harbaugh is going to be, the
veto power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but at the same time, you wonder, like, okay, is he going to take a look at the arsenal he has at his disposal and say, I'm going to really utilize it? Because as much as I think that it really worked to Michigan's advantage to do what they ended up doing last year, it works to Michigan's advantage to be a little bit more unpredictable, because you have 2 running backs that are in PFF's top 10, but you also have the number 8 quarterback in their top 10 in returning quarterback. So, and you've got a bunch of receivers that on paper look really good, but it's just a matter of getting them involved. And you also have a quarterback that can run. So if you take all of that, if you're Sherrone Moore, I would take a look at all of that and say, yes, I could run Blake Corum every single play and probably just drive down the field, or I could get everybody involved and be completely unpredictable and really break this thing wide open. That's kind of what I thought was going to happen going into last year.
Yeah.
It didn't. It was fine that it didn't. But if a opposing defense thinks, all right, well, here comes Blake Corum, or something of it, we're going to get a run. You have all these other things that you can basically expose them with. Michigan was really reticent to do it last year, particularly in the red zone. So that's, I think, where it will at least start to pay dividends. Yeah. And we'll see where Sherrone's head lies.
And I wanted to toss this at you, and we were just talking about this, but I noticed that Matt Weiss, at least the plays that I think were Matt Weiss's based on how they divided the labor up, he had a tendency to show his Tuesday and Wednesday homework on Saturdays, meaning he wanted to show how clever he was, more so than if that was the right play at the right time. And I think of no other play other than the Philly special attempt versus TCU, and it's just against Michigan's identity. It has been the whole year. So do you think that might be mitigated now that Sherrone Moore's kind of solo C?
I definitely, because Matt Weiss, I've had a lot of pregame conversations with him, pre and post, really, about like what the plan was maybe, and how Michigan was going to attack a certain opponent or a certain part. And it really was. I think you nailed it on the head that he's Tuesday, Wednesday homework. Sherrone doesn't really strike me as that, because Matt Weiss wasn't a guy who played, right? He's a guy who has long been an analyst, dating from back to his years with Jim Harbaugh at Stanford. He kind of rose up through the ranks as being that type of Moneyball style whiz kid, and having that type of, I'm looking at the X's and O's and I'm playing with the analytics and we're going from there. Sherrone Moore played, right? He was an offensive lineman at Oklahoma. And that's, I think, why he's been such a natural fit, going from tight ends coaching to coaching the offensive line to being the offensive coordinator, and why he has that fire. So I think that he's going to look a little bit less at I'm sure that they'll still take a look at some of the things that Matt Weiss instilled as far as probabilities and things of that nature. But I think there will probably be a little bit less of that and a little bit more of just traditional X's and O's of, here's what we can do. Or, if we're on the 1 yard line or the 2 yard line, as was that case, and we have, at worst, a top 10 running back in the country, we're going to do what a team with the number 1 offensive line and a top 10 running back in the country does, and give it to that guy, and give it to him and say, if we doesn't get it in a 4th down, then we're going to live to fight another day. Not, it'd be the same thing on the other end when they gave it to Kalel Mullings. It's about being smart with what you have. And I think that, there were moments when Matt Weiss, and I don't mean to impugn him. I don't know much about the scandal, but I think my interactions with him have indicated he's been a good guy to deal with. But I think, he sometimes thought he was the smartest guy in the room, and that certainly showed on the field from time to time.
Absolutely. Just a quick refresher for anybody who's just joining us. We have a special guest today, Isaiah Hull from WolverinesWire, Locked On Wolverines podcast. A lot of you in the chat probably watch his stuff all the time anyway. But definitely want to mention that. Send a super chat if you want to comment or requested, posted, and discussed on air. Those are the only things we're posting today is super chats. And don't forget to check out our new show that Mark and Steve Deace are doing called The One, which is live Thursdays at 5 p.m. No holds barred on one topic, and they go at it. And look out, because all bets are off.
It's been a good time, no doubt.
Absolutely. Isaiah, today's a really offense heavy show. So our big topic for the day is the kind of the spring football evaluation and looking at the QB room. And then we'll kind of throughout the episodes go through the depth chart and everything else. But what's so great is this offseason, this spring, we have a definitive QB1. So let's just embrace that for a second.
Yeah, it's been since Shea Patterson in 2019, really. And that season would have probably gone a lot better if he didn't get pretty severely injured on literally the first play that he had the ball in his hands. But so knock on wood, you hope that doesn't happen again. But yeah, at least not only do you not have a quarterback controversy, JJ McCarthy's healthy and able to go out there and have a spring ball, and he would have probably been much further ahead last year if he didn't have his shoulder injury. So it was all Cade, and Cade certainly didn't inspire a lot of confidence. I did my best to kind of, keep the Wolves at bay. It's like, listen, we already know what Cade can do. It doesn't really matter if he doesn't look super sharp in the spring game. But then when he does it in the first game, then it gives that opening to JJ McCarthy. We know how that goes. So JJ, entering his 3rd year, that's usually kind of when you see a quarterback take that big step forward, is in year 3. I mean, yes, we've seen, 1st and 2nd year quarterbacks in the last decade end up being pretty good, from Bryce Young to CJ Stroud. I mean, heck, even JJ last year. But usually when they get into year 3, that's when we start to really see guys take off. So I think that him having a spring ball where he can kind of really acclimate with his receivers. You don't have any, aside from Matt Weiss, and you bring in Kirk Campbell, who's already there. You don't really have any offensive turnover from a staff perspective. So you're keeping things pretty close to the same. and but still having a new guy kind of working with you, that could be honestly a positive in the sense of maybe he hears a couple different things from Kirk Campbell that he didn't hear from Matt Weiss, but he's had 2 years of Matt Weiss. So I think that you have a situation where the terminology is going to be the same as it has been for JJ, and the coaching, and as far as the offensive coordinator Jim Harbaugh is the same. Kirk Campbell is a guy who already has the familiarity with, but might be able to have some insights that Matt Weiss didn't. And you know, he had offensive coordinator experience himself at Old Dominion, so I think that all plays really well. And you would expect that usually that the more experienced players get, the better they are at the college level. It's almost without fail whenever you look at how players respond the further they go in their college career. And I always like to bring up when I was a fan, well before I was in the media, I used to always joke, because when I was still at Michigan, I got for $10, I got a number 10 jersey, Nike jersey from the TJ Maxx there at Maple and Jackson Boulevard. And so when I moved to California, I'd go to all these Michigan bars to watch games, and they'd be like, "Oh, cool, you got a Tom Brady jersey." And I'd be like, "Oh, this is a Jeremy Gallon jersey." And we'd all have a good laugh because Jeremy Gallon was awful at that time, right? Fast forward like 2 years, and Jeremy Gallon is the best wide receiver Michigan ever had. So, I mean, not really literally, but numbers wise with the single game and stuff like that, he became extremely dependable. You think about some of those guys throughout the years, you know, Jeremy Gallon, Stevie Brown, Morgan Trent, guys that were liabilities when they were on the field at one point and then became absolute beasts. So imagine, assuming that JJ McCarthy can get better, which I think he certainly can and will, that trajectory speaks very well. And then you're surrounded by a team that is in that same boat. Michigan lost very little. They're the number 5 returning production team in the country. Usually that bodes well. And the opposite tends to also be true. It's the same reason why heading into 2021, everyone's sitting there looking at Northwestern and being like, they're so good. I mean, they're gonna be right back out of the West. And I sat there and said, are they?
Not so fast. Yeah.
So usually it's a pretty dependable predictor. And I think that you mix having the quarterback with all of the other guys, and it really bodes very, very well for the offense.
I have to run to start another show. Isaiah, we appreciate the time. Thanks so much for being here. You know, you're welcome all the time. So I will be in touch, sir.
All right. Sounds good. Again, sorry you can't see me, but it's good
Mark
to see
Rogers,
you.
everybody. Thanks, Mark.
See you, John.
So I was just about to to kind of go into JJ. You know, he was when it was the Cade JJ battle, and I'm still bummed we didn't get to have that spring game. Cade on one side, JJ on the other, battling it out to really definitively see. But I mean, we all saw it in the Hawaii game, right? And then from then on, it was his job on merit, as Harbaugh said. And so I guess you know, from a ceiling perspective, I think that was like a big argument for JJ, is that the ceiling could be as high as national title with JJ, and obviously keeping what Cade did going in terms of beating the rivals and having that high win total, but then kind of taking that next echelon. Do you see 2023 as potentially being that year where you break that ceiling a little bit?
I absolutely do. I just put out predictions for every team in the Big Ten, at least for the regular season, and I have Michigan going undefeated again. Which, I mean, I know people probably would look at me and say Michigan homer. Of course, he's going to do that. Not really, because I thought that Michigan was going to go undefeated last year. I said this a lot on Locked On Wolverines, that I really didn't see a loss on the schedule except for maybe Ohio State, but I thought Michigan at that time was going to beat Ohio State. I demurred the week of the game because of Blake Corum's injury, but I digress there. But it's one of those things now where I look at it and I say, really, the challengers to Michigan at this juncture are Penn State and Ohio State again. And you can sit there and say Penn State's defense playing in Happy Valley. When Michigan has been a better team than Penn State, it has gone to Happy Valley and won every time. When it was an even team, it lost once in 2019 when they spotted them 21 points. Really should have won that game,
right?
But didn't. When it's been a lesser team, it's lost there the one time under Jim Harbaugh and James Franklin. And Ohio State, I look at that and I say, and I razzed my colleague over at WolverinesWire. I haven't even told him. It's totally mean, but which is bad for a guy wearing a Jesus is King hat, to be honest. But it's because he put out his predictions of what bowl games teams are going to. He put Ohio State going to the playoff and Michigan going to the Rose Bowl. And to me, it's like, what non-homer? I can understand, because I mean, Ohio State's number 2 in the SP plus, but when a team has beaten you twice in a row, and convincingly so, and you lose your starting quarterback who was a 2-time Heisman Trophy contender, and you have to go and play on the road, there is nothing that, and then the other team returns their entire team that beat you handily. There is no part in which you should look at that and say, like from a logical standpoint, that Ohio State should beat Michigan, unless that logic that you're using is vibes. So,
right. Yeah, no, well, I think that's really big, is that almost every quarterback in the Big Ten is going to be a new one, or like broken in, or maybe they've played relief duty in a game once or twice. But like Ohio State is starting a new quarterback, Penn State starting a new quarterback. So I think that when you look at that trend, I agree. I think it very well could be 12-0. And I predicted 11-1 with a 3-point loss to Columbus in Columbus. And then like the day before the game, I changed it to Michigan, because I just thought I had a feeling like it was going to be another one of those.
Yeah, and I certainly didn't once with the Blake Corum injury. I had some faith that they'd have some things, and then even being on the field, they didn't really have anything that they were doing that really made me change my mind, except for that Michigan just hung around. And it was kind of like, the more that Michigan, it was really in game, that it was kind of like, around halftime, it was kind of like, I think I said to someone during halftime of the game, I said, this kind of feels like the opposite of 2016, right? Michigan had a nice little lead at the half, and you felt pretty good. And that's kind of how Ohio State fans were feeling. I think that was kind of the moment where I was like, I think this is going to be the reverse 2016. And because I saw, it was like Michigan was starting to get a little more confident and all of that. And that's also for the same reason why I'm not going to say Ohio State is going to be able to go and win. And because none of these players on Ohio State now know what it's like to do anything other than to lose handily to Michigan, which is what Michigan players were used to for all of those really decades. And Ryan Day, what we've seen him in the Michigan game coach in a shell for 2 years, and Michigan be more creative. I can't see any reason why that won't change, because you get a little, it's either you're in a shell, or you're calling a perfect game, or you're too aggressive. And honestly, if he's going to go one way or the other, he's probably not going to call a perfect game. He's going to be too aggressive, and that's going to also play into Michigan's hands. So they'll play the game, and we'll know. But I even said on the field and in Columbus, I said, if Michigan wins this game, they'll also win in 2023. And I feel pretty confident in that. So we'll see.
I have a question, and what everybody, we will continue to talk QB2, QB3, and kind of predictions for those in a second. But I'm curious. I want to pick your brain about something related to Ohio State. You mentioned Ryan Day coaching in a shell, and then all of a sudden against Georgia, they turn into like New England Patriots level like team and almost won the game at the end. what do you like? And then obviously with Georgia like getting like just dropping TCU the next game, and Michigan losing to TCU barely. I've been having trouble like computing that. Like what do you think was kind of the factor of how like maybe did Ohio State just have a better like post game like postseason training regimen, or like what do you think was a factor in just how like this all happened?
I think it's multiple things. I think one of the and I obviously didn't see the entire Ohio State Georgia game because I was still at the stadium in Glendale, but I did see the second half, most of it, and I think in part it's matchups, right? Georgia, I don't think its defense was quite. It probably on paper was as good as Michigan for the most part, but I also don't think that they had faced an offense as good as Ohio State's.
True.
Georgia
I can
didn't
see
have the
that.
benefit of also game planning for Ohio State for the entire year the way Michigan did. And I think that plays a pretty big factor, right? Because it's Michigan is sitting there watching every Ohio State game, the staff, the players, all of that throughout the year. That's kind of a change from where things used to be. They are certainly focusing on that game. Georgia didn't have that benefit. So when they see Ohio State lined up a certain way, while they had a couple weeks to take a look at it, Ohio State also had a couple weeks to kind of self-evaluate and kind of break some tendency and things of that nature. So I think that those things kind of played into that. And then on top of it, for the difference between Michigan, TCU, I think Michigan took TCU lightly, to be honest, and from the players to the coaches. And it's, I mean, to myself, right? I was out on Locked On Wolverines podcast speaking of it as a foregone conclusion. I had my flight home from, well, I didn't actually have my flight home from California, but I had no return flight from Phoenix. I had Disneyland tickets, right? Like I think we all just looked at it and said, there's no way that Michigan loses to TCU. And I think TCU was a little bit better than Michigan thought it was going to be. And I think that that Michigan certainly helped in every single possible way. Not just 2 pick sixes, but 2 goal line turnovers. I mean,
Yeah, Michigan shot itself in the foot like 300 times in that game. And whether you look at the play calling, you look at the execution, you look at the defense maybe not being as strong as normal, it just seems like there's something where, and I noticed this in the Georgia game too last year, where it's almost treated as like an educational trip. Because if you watch some of the Instagram lives that the players were doing in that, like before the Georgia game, where they were on the yachts and stuff, and they were taking, if you remember that, like the boat tours and everything, they were enjoying it. And I'm like, are they fully locked in? Because it seems like they're not. And maybe they were a little bit more this time, but it still seems like there's some type of disconnect. And I'm wondering if that's why Chris Partridge is back, because as we know, when he was on the staff in 2015, did win a bowl game. So maybe they want to bring some of that magic back. Do you think that has something to do with it?
I think a little. I don't think it's necessarily at that bad this particular year. I mean, I think they wanted to beat TCU, but I think that they had convinced themselves more of like they weren't lining up against the number 3 team in the country. I think that they looked at it as we're lining up against Indiana. And I think that was the level of gamesmanship the coaches brought, that the players brought, like not recognizing the moment. It's, I think it doesn't help that, the Big Ten championship game the last 2 years, that's essentially what they've had to do. So it's not overcoming in the same way as like Georgia against LSU, where it's this, we have to face, Goliath before we go and face, the local army. It's something kind of more where in line with like Michigan's big hump is getting over Ohio State. And then once it gets over that, then they get the consolation prize from the West.
Right.
And it's
the
one
McDonald's Playhouse, as we call it, the Big Ten West.
Exactly. And I just think that they needed to look at TCU as being another Ohio State. And I just don't think that they did. And, I think it was a collective effort at losing. And I think that they did a great job honestly at staying in the game, though if they would have been smart about it, I think if Donovan Edwards scores on that first play, or if they managed to get a touchdown on that first drive and then do what they did on the ensuing drive for TCU, where they shut them out 3 and out, I think the game goes completely different, because now TCU's got they are who we thought they were, type thing, or at least who we heard they were. But TCU also went into that game. Like I said this all week long. Every time I talk to anyone at TCU, from Garrett Riley to Quentin Johnston to literally any single person, they were all, it was like they knew something and it was weirdly, it was similar to talking to Michigan guys before the Georgia game. It just turned out that the Michigan guys didn't know anything. They thought that they did, until they stood up next to the Georgia players and realized that they're twice our size and twice as fast.
Right. So, it's actually, nothing, Jon Snow, is definitely what that was like.
Oh, absolutely.
Reminder, when you shop Amazon, don't forget to use Mark's link in the description. We at various points shop on Amazon, and it really supports Mark and supports Voice of College Football. I just got an air fryer using Mark's link. I mean, it's great stuff. So definitely consider that. So going into QB2, I think that, we're a couple days into spring ball, right? Spring practice. And, I think that at least for the time being, you got to give QB2 to Davis Warren. Even though he had limited playing time in actual games, I have up his stats from the spring game, 12 for 23, 175 passing yards. He really did a good job, I think, of breaking through, and he had an opportunity in the spring game to do so, given the fact that JJ was out, and Cade played kind of limited snaps. What's your take on Davis Warren, and do you think that he's kind of in the QB2 at least for now, and then we'll see if Tuttle can get in there?
Yeah, I would say so. Tuttle, I honestly think is a downgrade. No offense to Jack Tuttle, if you're out there listening. I have not been kind to you for the last 2 years, as it were. So I'm not going to start now just because you're wearing maize and blue. I think Tuttle is a downgrade on Alan Bowman, to be honest. And Davis Warren was ahead of Alan Bowman, and who's a guy who started a lot of games in the Big 12. As far as Davis Warren is concerned, we just really haven't seen a lot. But I mean, to listen to anyone who will tell you in that building, especially the staff, they feel like they struck gold, in the sense of they feel like he is a 4-star quality quarterback that just didn't get the opportunity due to his leukemia. And it's really, there's really no way to prove them wrong until we see him more. So usually when they say things like that, they're referencing a guy like Rod Moore, who's been like, Jim Harbaugh said he'd be a 5-star if he wouldn't have graduated high school a year early, and if he would have, stuck around for his 18th year in high school, that he says he'd been a 5-star. We're seeing that on the field. He's playing like one. So you can, granted, Michigan makes it really difficult to take them at their word, because they've had moments where they've, even without Fred Jackson having been on staff most of those years, to Fred Jackson it up. Like, Donovan Jeter is the second coming of Mo Hurst, but twice as good, and it's like, you sit there and write that, and it's like everyone gets all excited, and then a couple games in, and you're like, he's not doing anything. So what do we believe? And they really kind of have ruined their own credibility in that sense. But that is kind of how they speak of Davis Warren, as being a guy that has that capability and that quality to him. I think the good thing for Davis, especially over the course of the last year, is his competition has been JJ McCarthy. So, a rising tide raises all ships, and you hope that he's getting a little bit of the seeing how JJ does it, and trying to battle for the starting job. And if he takes that mentality into the 2023 season, then that'll be really good. Now, Jack Tuttle, at least, you've got his stats up there. He played the one game last year.
Yep. Versus Penn State, which we always appreciate when a touchdown gets scored against Penn State. So I'll give him that. But yeah,
yeah,
a limited sample size.
what you started a
Last year.
lot of games the year before. You came from Utah. I was really underwhelmed. I don't think I even saw anything from him last year. It really was watching a lot of the 2021 season and just the schedule aligning where it seemed like I watched a lot of Indiana games, and he was not good. And so maybe he's better than what he's put on film, right? And that's always a thing. But at least it's like with the receivers and the offensive line that Michigan has, at least you figure that if it really is break glass in case of emergency, Jack Tuttle can probably win you some games, because you got two running backs you can rely on. A lot different than relying on Stevie Scott and Ty Freifogel and some of these other guys that Indiana had. So I think that's to his benefit, and it's to Davis Warren's benefit too. So I don't necessarily know for sure though, like what the future holds. I think if Jack Tuttle starts a game for Michigan, then obviously everything has gone completely
topsy-turvy. I know you said Alan Bowman is better, and I think I would agree with you there. Although I do think that they probably see Jack Tuttle as like the Alan Bowman replacement in some ways. Transfer
100%.
quarterback. They designed a lot of like rollouts for Bowman. If you watch some of the early games that he did play some snaps, there were a lot of designed rollouts and things like that. So they may do that again in garbage time this year to kind of just ease him into the offense a little bit. We do have some other quarterbacks listed here. I've got Alex Orji, Jadyn Davis, Kendrick Bell, brother of course, Ronnie Bell, and Brandon Mann. I'm really excited about Kendrick Bell. And the reason I'm excited about Kendrick Bell is I looked up, I think he had 35 passing touchdowns and 10 rushing touchdowns a senior year. I mean, he's obviously going to need to learn the system. He's going to need to be a part of it. But I think that there could be some serious promise in future years if he starts to ball out.
Well, count out a Bell at your own peril. We saw that with Ronnie, and there's times when there's evaluations that are just right on. Ronnie Bell, Quiddy Pay being two guys who had committed, and I think I was with 24/7 Sports when that happened with both of them at that time, and I just remember going on the board and people just losing their minds, right? Like, how could Michigan ever? And then these two guys end up being among the best to do it, right? And Ronnie Bell was talking about it at I don't think it was the media day. It was just like one of those like Tuesday press conferences at the Fiesta Bowl. And he was just saying like, he's watching his tape of his brother and it's like, wait a second. Is he really good? And he's like going out and playing with them right in the and when he goes home and he's like catching the ball, it's like, I think he might be actually really good. Like, that type of thing is if he has the work ethic that Ronnie Bell does, and he seems like he has the athleticism, then that bodes really well for Michigan. As far as this year is concerned, unless that he wants to use more of the athlete portion, or unless Michigan finds some kind of special role for him, the way that they talked about doing with Dan Villari, but then never really showed, then, but that, I think that role would more likely go to Alex Orji, who, honestly, I'm surprised that they're not lining him up at defensive end at this juncture based off of what I've seen from him lately. He, I think, could have a role in the offense if they were so inclined. However, I would say that it's probably in Michigan's best interest not to, because I think that is among those types of things where it's getting too cute, And I mean, you don't need it, right? And I think that's the same thing even with Kendrick in that moment, because it's like you've got all of these other established players who can do all the things that you want to do. Right. So don't get cute. Do what you're capable of doing with the guys that you can rely on. But maybe when games are pulling away, we'll see all of the above. I'm also curious about Jadyn Davis. He was the first of the quarterbacks from 2022 class to commit. Was a 4-star from Apple Valley, California, but not really highly thought of. It's kind of an interesting thing to be a 4-star quarterback from the West Coast. That's not really highly thought of.
6'5", 235, somewhere around there pounds.
Yeah, and he was like the
solid.
the only guy that didn't really see time in that UConn game when they decided that they were going to march out everybody and have them throw a pass and complete a pass. So it'll be interesting. I think that they have a lot of talent, and I think that's a lot of unheralded talent behind JJ McCarthy. So it's just a question of who's legit and who's not. I mean, they've got a couple guys that certainly could be well above average, but they also need to just kind of be able to keep the momentum going as well.
Absolutely. And my final topic for today kind of weaves all these threads that we've been talking about together. What will the new offense, what does all this mean for 2024 potential recruit Jadyn Davis with 6 crystal balls, right, to Michigan? And apparently his big thing, from what I've been kind of reading around online, is not so much NIL, but like, does he have opportunities to throw the ball? Right.
I mean, yeah, he absolutely does. I think, he could, be a guy who plays early. That doesn't necessarily mean freshman year, because I could also see a situation where JJ McCarthy comes back his senior year, regardless of his production his junior year. He just strikes me as that type of player. But I mean, I think that's the whole point right now, is because you don't have an obvious heir apparent to JJ McCarthy. And while Davis Warren, they think, is a 4-star, they feel like they really lucked out. They got a guy that is, would be starting a lot of other places. And, they stole Alex Orji away from Virginia Tech, and they like his ability to be a dual threat. Like I mentioned, Jadyn Davis being a 4-star, right. Kendrick Bell, like I said, never count out a Bell. Nonetheless, being a 5-star, he's not necessarily as highly thought of as some of the other 5-stars in 2024. But
interesting,
being a 5-star, being the guy that Michigan's been all in on, being a guy that they're trying to bring in his teammates, Channing Goodwin, who's the son of Jonathan Goodwin,
right?
Being a receiver and all, and they're really, it could be a situation. I'm assuming they're really pitching really hard of like, you can do what you're doing at the high school level at college, and you can do it with other great players. You can do it with this offensive line, all of this kind of stuff. I'm surprised he hasn't committed yet. I don't know really what the holdup has been. Usually that doesn't tend to bode well for a school, but it doesn't really seem like it's going to matter that much, because all the other schools he seems to be considering keep on filling up. And while sometimes there's a couple here and there where it's like, oh, they might get back into it, whether it's Clemson or Ohio State or whatever, it's a matter of, Michigan's still the one that's pressing the hardest, and they've really not recruited any other quarterbacks except for Jim Harbaugh going to seeing Dylan Raiola and a little bit of conversations with Michael Van Buren at St. Francis Academy. So I think that that bodes well for Michigan as far as being able to get him. It sounds like he's going to make a decision sometime in the next couple weeks here, finally.
Yeah, he wants to get it over with, and apparently he is visiting one more time in the spring, from what I was seeing. So hopefully they can use that opportunity so that Jadyn and Kirk Campbell can get together, because I know that was a kind of an unknown. Is like, how are they going to gel? Kirk Campbell being the new QB's coach, and what that dynamic is going to be like. But hopefully Harbaugh is able to close that down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's, if you're going to keep on doing this, we're going for one quarterback a year scenario, you absolutely need to get the guy this year. It's one thing if you lose out on Dante Moore, a guy you've been recruiting since like 2017, and you lose out on him. that's a huge loss. It doesn't matter as much as long as you get that next guy here. Now, he might get thrown to the wolves, if JJ McCarthy leaves and say, they feel like Jadyn Davis gives them the best opportunity to win right away. But, that might be something that he's looking for. I mean, careful what you wish for when you're a quarterback. You don't want to come out and play as a true freshman most of the time. You want at least a year. I mean, or the best case scenario, I think, is getting to be what JJ had, where he comes in, runs a couple plays, and goes back on the bench, isn't really responsible for much. So, I mean, Michigan can pitch him the world. They have been pitching them the world. It's just pull the trigger. But at the same time, like I think that they could get back in the Michael Van Buren sweepstakes if they were so inclined. I think that would be a good move. But obviously they've been all eggs in on Jadyn Davis. Close out, get him. It's worked well the last time he brought a 5-star quarterback in. You hope that the same type of deal happens here.
Absolutely. We got Isaiah Hole here, and really appreciate you being here. I'm gonna start ending all these with the spirit of what we've been doing the last 2 years, the banner. What are you doing to beat Ohio State today? So everybody think about that. Isaiah, really appreciate you being on and taking your time today. And everybody, tell everybody, just remind them where they can find you.
You can find me at WolverinesWire.usatoday.com. It's been relatively quiet over there over the past week or two or so, but we'll be gearing up now that spring ball's starting. And Locked On Wolverines podcast, wherever you get your podcast, as well as on YouTube. And those are 5 days a week.
Absolutely. Well, again, thanks for being here, and thanks everybody in the chat for being here. Go Blue, and see you next week.